Good afternoon. This is Leslie Warner with Tufts Alumni Career Services. Welcome to the Market Your Brand, Cover Letters and More webinar. We will be here from 1 to 2:15, including time when I'll be answering your questions. And we'll stay on the line until 2:30 if there are additional questions that come in. Now, how to do your questions. You'll see either at the top of your screen, like mine, where it says chat, or at the bottom of your screen where you hover your cursor, a little bubble that says chat. When you have any sort of question or comment, please type it into the chat and then I'll respond at a few times during the presentation. I'll pause, or if it's related directly to what I'm explaining at that moment, I might insert the explanation right then. So please do put your questions and comments in. Now, a little bit more about me. I've been with Alumni Career Services at Tufts for 16 years. I like to tell, especially young recent grads, that that's the longest I've been with any one organization or job, mostly for good reasons. But that means I've had a lot of transitions. I've worked on a lot of cover letters, both for myself and for folks that I was working with. Before Tufts, I worked primarily as a career coach in various settings, including corporate outplacement. And I spent 5 years at Mass General as an internal HR recruiter, which means, again, I reviewed a lot of cover letters there. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we'll be talking about that in just a minute. Now, with Tufts Alumni Career Services, tell you a bit more about us. We have three main goals. One is to present programs like this, including webinars, which then get uploaded onto our website so you can view, anyone can view them later, and some in-person networking or content-focused events for all alumni, all schools. Second thing we want to do is foster networking and connections between alumni and between alumni and students. One way, sometimes that's through events, and right now there's a new online resource called The Herd, which is for alumni to student networking. You'll see the link and logo for that at the bottom of Nicole's email, which she sent you earlier before our webinar, and you can also see details on our website and the Tufts Alumni website. Third thing that we do is provide individual career coaching appointments for graduates of arts, sciences, and engineering and School of the Museum of Fine Arts. So just to get started now. Okay. Our agenda today, why is your cover letter so important? Including in a changing landscape, right, where there are other ways that you're communicating with employers. Then the stages of working on your cover letter, pre-writing, writing, and editing. Oh, I see a comment that says they don't hear sound. No, I'm not muted. Um, Then we'll talk about thank you follow-up letters, which are very important, sometimes neglected or underutilized part of the job search process, and some other job search correspondence types, and some sort of trends of other ways that people are communicating with employers. So the three-step process for writing, as I mentioned, is, oh wait, that's not the right. Yeah, there we go. Why is your cover letter still important? Well, it's an opportunity to really customize your message. You're writing to a specific person, which is the hiring manager, about a unique opportunity, about a way to meet their needs right now, this point in time. And that's much more customized typically than the resume is, and then your LinkedIn can be. You're really writing to a person with a set of needs or problems or issues on their desk. It gives you a chance to demonstrate your research, writing, and analytical skills. It gives you a chance to show your personality, your enthusiasm, and the quality of your research to show how you can meet their specific needs. So before I jump into the process of writing, just a note to say, if you hear from somebody and they say, "Oh, nobody reads cover letters at my organization," well, that may be true. Or it may be true in some departments, but not in others. So, for example, in some technical departments, I know that cover letters are less important or less emphasized. But in that same company, if you're applying to work in, say, the marketing or business development or sales area, they will look at a cover letter because it's an example of your persuasive writing, right? So if a specific, for example, a third party outside recruiter says to you, a headhunter, "Oh, you don't need a cover letter." Okay, that's fine. That recruiter is going to be advocating and customizing and focusing your message with the employer, right? So if a specific person in a specific instance tells you you don't need a cover letter, that's okay. But general rule of thumb, it's still part of the etiquette of what we're doing here. And it is still expected or a way to really help tailor your message and get it to speak to that specific person. So the pre-writing. You really need to be clear about your career assets. I say research, meaning just acknowledging that for most of us, it can take a thoughtful check in to really see, do I really know what my skills are, what my relevant accomplishments are, what personal qualities, knowledge areas, everything that I have that's could be helpful to this employer. Then there's what I call your market differentiator. This is when we're getting into all of this together is really your personal brand. What do I stand for? What's important to me? How do I want to be known? How am I known in my community, in the larger community? What's my reputation? Your market differentiator is that piece that's different about you compared to others in your field, possibly could be applying for this job who might have similar skills and background, occasional preparation, a lot of ways. So, for example, and one way to get at that is to actually make a chart for yourself and start brainstorming what are some of the ways that you are similar to other applicants or potential applicants for this position, and what are some of the ways you're different. And one example I like to use is, if you speak um, Czech, or Czechoslovakian, if that's the proper language that they speak there. That might be a really interesting quality that you have. Maybe you spent time living and working there. If this company or organization is entirely focused on the needs or customers in a very local area with zero interest or need to expand into the Czechoslovakian market, then even though, yes, that's a differentiator, it's not going to help you in this case. On the other hand, if you have a language skill in a market they might be considering or planning or working in, that is a market differentiator. Another example might be you have experience in a different industry or a different job function. Think about what are the ways that additional experience that's different could be specifically helpful to this employer, right? You have to be able to articulate that. Um, then, second part of the research is researching the industry, the company, the job. What are any new initiative trends that are happening? What's happening with competitors? Business issues. I say business issues, but again, that applies to government and nonprofit too, right? What are the issues involved in doing what they do? Some of that will be on the website or through Googling, but it's great and really ideal to bump up your research by going beyond that website, obvious Google, to things that aren't necessarily free on the internet. Trade and industry press articles, academic journals, if there's academic research occurring at this employer. If not, don't worry about the academic ones unless there's a reason that they're relevant. And you can get access to these databases of these articles in many public libraries for free. Check in with the reference librarian to see which database or resource to tap into. And the Tufts online community, which you can register for to receive emails or newsletters from Tufts, provide Tufts with your email address, and you can select what to receive, but one of the resources behind that password is library databases. More pre-writing. Really, you want to be very clear on identifying the needs of the employer. What's the required and preferred knowledge, skills, abilities, experiences, and other keywords from the ad. You'll see sometimes the part where they talk about what's required or preferred skills is quite short, but the part where they're describing all the different job activities and deliverables might be quite long. So you pick out all of those keywords too. You can highlight them, circle them stand out. And then I really love and recommend this approach of making a chart, writing it down, because I see smart people every day um, doing this matching of the employer's needs to my qualifications and doing it in their head and while they're writing. Not that you can't do that, but I would just submit to you that it's much harder than if you make a chart, because then when you have a chart, you can also prioritize. Okay, if I have 20 or skills or qualifications listed, that's too many to fit in a typical cover letter. So you can prioritize which one's the most important to the employer, right? Not necessarily to you. Um, so you write down just a bulleted list and then note next to it what you bring, a little word or phrase to remind you of what that meets that need. I'll show you just a made up sample on the next page. Their needs, 3+ years higher ed experience, my qualifications, tough submissions, because I worked there for 3 years, experience with diverse population, internships with tutoring and BELL, which is an urban tutoring and empowerment organization, training, develop and present, right, which are two different skills. I could separate them out if I wanted, but in this case, I developed and presented the trainings for tour guides, college application. Um, so you can see it would be a much longer list. This is just a sample to show you. And the other reason I really recommend and encourage people to do the writing down of the match is, guess what? This really helps you prepare for the interview, right? Oh, and by the way, terminology. I call it cover letter, although in some cases it will be an email. In other cases, it will be, a letter format document, which is then uploaded into a database, or a letter format document, which might be submitted as an attachment, right? So cover letter is kind of the shorthand form for this customized communication that might be presented in various formats, but um, may or may not be a letter. Um, so what they can and cannot do, they can get people interested in you. They can't get you the job all by themselves. They can make it easier and faster for that employer to see that what you offer is relevant to their needs, right? And you want to really keep that in mind when you're writing. You're not just showing them, hey, here's a bunch of stuff I've done. You need to build that bridge and really show how what you've done helps you solve their problem. You can't capture all of your experience and qualifications. And I certainly see work with struggle with this, where particularly if you're a recent grad with a number of internships or campus experiences, shorter term experiences, that's hard. You won't have room to list 10 different things, or describe 10 different things. So it's picking which are the most important as best as you can. So now I'm getting ready to write. Typical format: one paragraph of an introduction. We'll talk about some ways to do that. The body, where you're showing that match, could be a couple of paragraphs, could include bullets, not copied and pasted from your resume, but it can be similar and just customized to this employer, this situation, and then the closing. Now, a little word about length. Usually, most cases, that cover letter will be no more than 1 page. Exceptions that I've seen where it can be appropriate is, let's say you're applying for a very senior management role, executive director type role in a nonprofit, where they have 3 or 4 major buckets of responsibility that you need to do. You do need to, if those 3 or 4 buckets are all equally important, as they might be, you need to hit each bucket with a sample or an example of what you've done and how you can provide for them. So sometimes for that type of opportunity, you may see a longer cover letter, but generally it's one page. So those opening paragraphs. There's an article which I provide a link to in the resources at the end that has some really interesting opening paragraphs because if you think about it from the employer's point of view, you could have a very well written, thoughtful, "Dear Ms. Smith, I'm very interested to apply for the auditing assistant position, which I saw posted on Indeed.com. Your organization has an excellent reputation in the business community, and I believe my background and skills are an excellent match." Okay, nothing exactly wrong with that. It's just how does it feel from the employer side to read that paragraph 50 times, even 10 times? And that's the kind of intro that many people do. So what I'm offering is some samples of ways to make it, in your personal voice with your personal connection either to the skills that are needed or the brand itself, or you'll see, I'll show a few different examples. Here's a little bit cheesy, but again, when I was 7, I wanted to be the Geico Gecko. When I grew up, I realized that wasn't an option. But you can imagine my excitement when I came across the events manager position, which would have me working side by side with my favorite company mascot, right? Captures the attention, says the name of the job you're applying for, and builds that personal voice. Now, just as an example, suppose I was all excited about the Geico Gecko, but I'm applying to work in this insurance company, auditing and risk management department, right? I don't. You would necessarily want to lead with how excited you are about the gecko, if you're going to be working on reducing lawsuits at the company, right? You'll be thinking about the culture, about who you're speaking to, and about what their culture is. But for events manager, sure. Oh, and by the way, you don't fake this, right? If it's something like that, you want it to be true. Here's another couple of very different examples. While you won't find the title community manager listed on my resume, I've actually been bringing people together online and off for 3 years while running my own blog and series of meetups. Now, I don't know this personal story here. It's possible the meetups were about knitting or ancient Greek philosophy, right? The content of them might have had nothing to do with whatever this company does, but you can see they're bringing in a key skill right up front, um, and building that link to the job. Then another example, and again, these are all from this Muse article. Among my colleagues, I'm known as the one who can, no matter what amount of what hits the fan, which is why I think there's no one better to fill Birchbox's customer service leader position, right? Building that quality of picking up the pieces, solving problems to the customer service role. So I just show those examples just to show you a few different ways, and the articles on the Muse and other resources give you other good examples too, to inspire you. So while you're writing, think about what you want to say before you begin writing. Say your key points out loud. If you can't, you're not ready to write. Then think about why you. Show how your background, interests, experience, qualities make you a good fit for this role, this employer, this industry, right? Why them? Show how your interests have been consistent with theirs. And you can see how some of those examples I showed were starting to do that, or some of these things. Any questions coming in yet? No? Okay. So a little checklist to think about while you're writing. Tell the reader exactly why you are writing. Okay, little cautionary tale. I once saw the most amusing, vivid, personal voice cover letter I have ever seen. She was a new grad. She was trying to make some points about her character and her work ethic. And she talked about growing up and visiting her grandma's farm and the bull chasing her across the field and leaping over the fence. Literally, the whole opening was about the bull and the farm. Then she got to how she started this cookie business, selling cookies door to door at Tufts, and earned a significant amount of money doing that. she didn't get to mentioning the job title or what she was actually applying for until way down at the end. So we laughed over that together, saying, okay, keep some of the bull or the farm, not as much. There was a way too much about the farm in terms of what the purpose of this letter was, and to bring what she was applying for right up front. But it was a great example of a personal voice. She just went so far in that direction. It was this very amusing story that didn't quite do the job of a cover letter of building that bridge to the needs of the employer. Um, try to address a specific person. Okay, sometimes the ad will tell you reports to VP of marketing, and you can then look sometimes on the company website. You can find that information of who that person is. Other times, LinkedIn, right? Since if you know the precise title, precise department, company, you can find out who that is through LinkedIn. Um, uh, you can't always know. Another thing you can do is try calling human resources and asking, may I have the main company number? May I have the name of the VP of marketing? Um, it's if you absolutely can't find a specific name, and sometimes they're written if it's a very vague way or they don't say who it reports to, you can say, dear hiring manager. Um, it's perfectly fine. Again, typically you use an actual business letter format unless the company website tells you to do something different. Again, unless if the cover letter is the body of the email, if that's what the instructions tell you to do, then if you're not putting in a lot of, headers of people's addresses and so on, right? If that makes sense. It's the business letter format if it's going to be a PDF document or, a separate document. Mention your referral source, again, right up front where you saw the ad or a person's name if that's how you got referred. But you only mention a person's name if it's somebody that's known to who you're writing to, right? Um, or if it's someone at the company. Sue Smith in your company's accounting department suggested I apply, right? Target their job in your writing. Show that match. Now, using active voice, that is a tricky one because many of us find, and I've seen this in many letters that I've reviewed, the passive voice can sneak in because you're trying to vary your sentence structure, right? So, for example, that would be, and, more volunteers were recruited than ever before. Well, if that's all you're saying about it, you haven't made clear that you recruited those volunteers, right? So you don't want to say that something occurred in a passive voice, partly because it's a little unclear then about who did it. Strong verbs, right? Few adjectives. This is another one that can trip people up sometimes because we sometimes think with some of the other types of writing you may have done, oh, adjectives are great. They clarify things, they make it more interesting. Well, a few carefully selected ones, yes, but lots of adjectives just um, kind of load it down and make it less clear. Now, my next point is also a little challenging sometimes. You want it to be conversational, a personal voice, you coming through, but not too informal, right? And too informal was, my young friend with the bull chasing her across the field. It not even if she'd put the job that she was applying for right up front, this very funny story about farms and bulls was just not the right content and not quite the right tone. Usually, as I say, one page. Now, another thing, a way to think about tone. If you write a cover letter, as many and many folks I've worked with, and you think, okay, I'm making good key points, but it feels a little blah. Um, it feels a little bland, or I am not sure if my personal voice is coming through. If you have time, it's great to just set it aside for a day and take a fresh look. If you've been working hard on it, anything starts to look blah if you've been really wrestling with it for a while. So if you have time to put it aside and take a fresh look the next day, maybe it will sound more alive then. If not, put it aside again and take whatever form of writing will help you write really fast, really unself-consciously. So for some of us, that's scribbling on a pad of paper. For some people, it's typing really fast. This is a writing exercise. It's to free up that personal voice. So you imagine you're writing to Dear Aunt Mary, somebody who knows you, who loves you, a real person, my fictional Aunt Mary, but you pick a real person who knows you well, who loves you, who has infinite patience to hear all about why you're excited about this job, why you want to apply, why you think you'd be really great at it. And you kind of brag and you kind of get into it. Um, and then when you finish, and don't worry about length, just really get into it. What you're excited about, why you think you'd be great, why you're interested in this company, in this job, what ideas you might bring to them. And when you read that over, you'll see you've really captured your enthusiasm, you've captured your pride in your past accomplishments. You may have even come up with some new ideas or thoughts about how you could contribute or specific ideas. Now, you can't cut and print that and send exactly that to the company. It's going to be a little too informal, but you can I promise you, you'll find ideas, words, and phrases that you can use to shape a new letter that captures your voice, because that's where you want to tap into that emotion of excitement, pride, curiosity, engagement, right? And bring that in. So in most cases, I recommend just starting fresh with, the two documents there to kind of look at, so you know what your key points are, but you're really bringing the Aunt Mary voice in there. Oh, and by the way, that Aunt Mary voice, that excitement, that pride, that's some of the language or ideas you want to capture for your tell me about yourself for your job interview too, right? That can't be a dry recitation of skills. Back to now we're editing. We're looking it over, we're looking at what you've written, and you're asking, did I communicate what I offer and how that is helpful to them rather than what's in it for me? Um, did you address the audience's needs specifically? Keeping the focus on the employer, not starting every sentence with I. Is it engaging? Is the message strong and positive? So you try not to start a sentence with, although I don't have X skill, right? You're not going to lie. You're not going to misrepresent anything, but you can emphasize what you do have and also what you bring that's similar or related. This is a question that has come in. Are specific keywords as important in cover letters as they are in resumes? What a great question. And I am going to do a little research and see what I can dig up on that. What we don't know is, I think this is complete guessing, but my guessing is that the database systems are set up to search the resumes for keywords, for company names, for degree names, those kinds of things, and that they won't be doing that type of search on the cover letter. But I will double check on that because that is an excellent question, and it may vary from company to company. So I'll see what different kinds of info I can find. What I do know where keywords are extremely important is in your LinkedIn profile. And just a quick pep talk to use all the different sections of the LinkedIn profile: headline, the about section, descriptions and bullets under your jobs, what I call the cheesy skills section, where you're just listing the skills that you have. All of those are, we don't know the exact formula, of course, they won't tell us, but all of those are relevant for keyword search when people are looking for you on LinkedIn. So some pet peeves from recruiters, including both internal and headhunter, HR and headhunter recruiters, that shows no research, no knowledge of the organization. It's going to read and sound like kind of a template or a form letter, a letter that you've sent over and over, even though you change 2 words in the first paragraph. I'm very excited to apply for X at always wanted to work at Y company, right? Um, and they can tell. And one interesting point that I see here is sometimes I have people I've worked with who have done research, who do have a more thorough knowledge of the organization and the trends. They just haven't figured out how to work that in to the letter. So that's something you that again, thinking about it and for it can be helpful. Repetition of the resume. Yeah, you don't want the exact same words. Um, for example, if you're using that format where you say, my back, you have a nice lead paragraph, then you say, my background is an excellent match for your needs, colon, and then maybe you have 3 or 4 bullets. Some people love that format because you don't need as much connecting words, connecting blah, blah. Um, and you can just use parallel structure so that each, if you're starting each bullet with a verb, you start each bullet with a verb, but you don't cut and paste from the resume. On the other hand, right, maybe you add a few details, maybe you customize it or weave it towards the employer, right? As a little bit different from what's on the resume. On the other hand, I once had somebody where in the cover letter there was a really killer accomplishment with a great result. It was really well written, it was interesting, and it was really relevant to the employer's needs. Then I went and looked at the resume. I couldn't find that killer accomplishment anywhere in the resume in any form. And when I asked the person about it, she said, well, she didn't want to repeat. She figured since it was so juicy, let's stick it in one place, and that way both documents have juicy content. And while I applaud her wanting to have variety and not repeating the resume, the problem with leaving out your killer best accomplishment from the resume is you can't be sure they're going to read both documents. Remember, this is not a person sitting at their desk saying, oh, my job today is to read 5 applications from front to back. It may be that they've got a few that they've been handed by someone or that they've selected or that they've pulled from a database using keywords. And it might be that, and usually what they do first, again, is what we hear from hiring managers and recruiters is they'll give quick, very few seconds scan of the resume. They're looking at job titles. They're looking at keywords, job titles, names of employer, right? And relevant skills, relevant information, relevant education. And then if they see in that 10-second scan things that they like, they'll read it a little more thoroughly. And then they'll to scan at least the first paragraph of the letter, right? That's typically what we hear. Or so that you do need to be sure that your most important information easily seeable and really pops out in both documents, just again, not word for word. And some people, another pet peeve, the what's in it for me. Oh, I see you have an excellent professional development program, and I really look forward to having the company pay for my MBA. And of course, I bring the skills back to you. You need to be careful about that. It's not that wanting to build your skills and develop isn't a good thing, but um, too much emphasis on that is more like, okay, here's what the company's going to do for me. And often people write letters that are long, rambling, kind of listing a bunch of stuff related to the job, but not with a clear focus. And then I wrote this on purpose, the mistakes and topographical errors. And topographical errors is a great example of, typical is a real word, right? Topography, maps, so on. It's just not typographical, which is what I actually meant. Is it fair that one typo in a resume or cover letter could sink your candidacy? No, it's not fair, but it might be true at some employers. Other employers, and I've heard stories about this from a client or two, you sit in the interview, you see your resume or cover letter, on the person's lap with something circled, a big circle in red pen. Now, a circle in red pen doesn't automatically mean you made a mistake. It did in this case. And that, imagine, that doesn't put you in the best frame of mind for your interview, right? So how to send your cover letter? Basically, you follow their instructions in the ad. Do they accept attachments? Some job ads these days are very, very written, and they may have a very often, depending on the size of the organization, they may have a very specific system where you go to an online system and upload your resume and cover letter. Sometimes people tell me those systems are annoying because you upload these documents and then you have to answer a questionnaire, which is kind of repetitive sometimes, but patience, right? I tell anytime they make you jump through hoops, you know, some people won't jump through those hoops. Sometimes instead of a traditional cover letter, I've seen this sometimes for certain kinds of jobs, it'll say, write us a 300-word essay on why you want to work and why this job and why you'd be a great fit. Basically, they're giving you the prompt questions for the cover letter, but they're also making it short, you know, and kind of tight. So often it may take the form of you make a PDF of the cover letter and resume. Should it be in one document or two? See if they have instructions on that. If you do make it, whatever type of document you make, one or two, name it very carefully. Remember, from your point of view, this is the, you know, IBM cover letter. But from IBM's point of view, everything they're getting is an IBM cover letter. And it's way more helpful if you give it a title like this one, Warner L. Associate Director Resume, right? Your name, the job you're applying for, and what it is, resume and cover letter, or just a resume. So again, this will vary depending on the company. Smaller organizations or some organizations just say, email it to, you know, hr@organization.org or oh, but before we move on to the thank you follow-up letter, I just wanted to say the other thing you can think about is, and again, I talk about this in the job search success webinar, is what are other ways you can catch the hiring manager's attention? Because the sad and just realistic truth out there is that many letters and resumes are not read by a human. They may go directly into a database, what I used to call the database in the sky, which now with the cloud often is in the sky, but it may go directly into a database, or if it's not in a database, it's in some sort of a stack, either an online or stack that people may not be reading all of. So what do you do to catch a hiring manager's attention? One tactic is if the resume is going to HR or a database that's uploaded, if you can figure out who the hiring manager is or is likely to be, you can write to them directly and say, I applied online or I submitted my resume and cover letter on your careers website for the such and such position, but I wanted to write to you directly because I'm so interested in this role and really believe my blah blah experience could be a great fit. And then the rest of it is the same cover letter. You tell them I followed the rules, I did the procedure you asked for. And sometimes people are hesitant and they say, oh, isn't that? I say, you know, if it's email, they don't have to read it. They don't have to open it. Some books will talk, and experts will talk about a tactic of using paper, nice paper, matching envelope, cover letter, resume, and again, the same thing. I submitted my application online, but I wanted to write to you directly, dear Mr. Smith or Ms. Wing. You know, when you have the name, you've figured out who the manager is likely to be. The advantage of paper is that at least it isn't going to be thrown away without anyone opening the envelope, which can definitely happen to email. The downside is you don't want to really be out of touch with their culture, right? If it's a fast-paced tech company, sometimes they don't use US mail at all for anything. They don't have mailboxes anymore. You know, it's so you can think, is it an email approach? Is it a direct message through LinkedIn that's very brief. That is not as long as a cover letter, but is reaching out to the relevant person to tell them that you're applying and that you have, ideas and skills to contribute. There are also books and articles written. There's a book by the title of Guerrilla Marketing, EU, not OREURILLA, Guerrilla Marketing in the Job Search, where they talk about all different creative ways to hiring managers' attention, to communicate with them. So you can go there for more ideas. But again, think about what's going to be appropriate work or fit for your industry, for your sector. So thank you, follow up. That means you've had an interview, and this letter, or usually email, again, you'll see books and articles that say if you write a handwritten, thank you note right after the interview, that helps you stand out. And that can be true. Again, think about culture, think about what their expectations or how they communicate with each other. So for example, if you're applying to be in the development or fundraising office of a nonprofit, a really nicely typed paper thank you letter could be really appropriate because that's a tool that you use in fundraising, right? It's sort of like a work sample. Or handwritten. The thing about handwritten, though, is you have to be sure that you have room for that middle paragraph. That middle paragraph is where you say, here's what I heard you say is most important to you. Here's what here's my understanding of your top challenge. It's not a complete restate of all your skills, but a brief reminder of skills and experiences that you bring that you look forward to working on that top challenge. If you forgot something or you can think of a better example for something, you can work that into your middle paragraph, right? Um, after the interview, I thought further about the blah blah question. And I'd like to share another example. You don't have to tell them you thought of a better example or that you made a mistake or, well, if you actually made a mistake, oh, this is interesting. This came up in a technical interview that a young alum had where he knew right in the moment that he had made a mistake in a technical answer. And he said he felt very frustrated. It was sort of engineering 101 and he'd just forgotten for a minute. So he, in his thank you email, he said, of course, I realized right away that my such and such answer on the blah blah question was not correct. And I went right straight home and looked it up. And as I thought, answer was such and such. If you really do make a mistake, own it and tell them what you found out that's accurate. And responding concerns. So sometimes they'll share a concern. Well, we're not sure if you have enough X experience to really hit the job and hit it and going quickly right away. And you do your best to respond in the moment, but maybe in a letter you have more within 24 hours, right? You want to send it within 24 hours. But in your thank you follow-up email, you have a chance to think further. How do you know you could learn that X thing quickly, right? Is there any example you can cite from your past experience? Is there something, have you had a chance to, for example, now that maybe you didn't do this before the interview, but you take some time to look up the X thing that you don't have enough experience about, is there a way you could take an online course? Is there a way you can start teaching yourself that skill already? Again, if you know that skill is part of the job, you can start that research or self-teaching process even before you go for the interview, right? It really helps to be able to look in the eye and say, I've already taken a look at the blah, blah program, and I can see how I could take a Coursera course or when you have a specific strategy could meet that need that goes beyond just I'm a quick learner, but has more detail to it. The other way you might know about a concern is, for example, you have good interview training, and at the end of the interview, you do a question that's called for the objections in sales. Like, why won't you buy today? Well, you're not going to ask it in that pushy way. Although my My car salesman, when I was buying a car some years back, literally said that. What's getting in the way of you buying today? I said, oh, please, you're not offering me enough money for my trade-in. We're trying to do this. But what you ask in the interview is something along the lines of, at the end of the interview, you kind of sum up. As I understand it, you're looking for someone who can do A and B and brings C and D skills. I believe I've shown that I have the C and D skills and that I can do A and B for you. I'm really interested, and I think this job could be a really good fit. Do you have any concerns? Right? You're asking the employer in the interview, do you have any concerns about my background, um, about ways that my background might not be a good fit? Right? You're kind of not asking it personally, like what's wrong with me. You're saying, is there anything that's not as much of a fit? Sometimes you've had a misunderstanding. I had a client that happened where they thought he didn't have enough industry exposure. And he realized, he hadn't told the story well enough. And he did have that industry exposure. And he was able to respond in the interview and then in the follow up. Sometimes it's a concern that you're not sure how to overcome, but you give it your best shot, as I say, and then think about it a little more um, for the follow-up email. Thing about concerns, just a quick story, true story that happened to with another candidate that wasn't my candidate. She applied for a sales manager role, and it was in a new region and a new that she hadn't precisely worked in before. And she got all the way to the final round interview and they turned her down and they said, we're concerned you don't really have experience at this level in our industry. And so, we're just not sure if you're the right person. So she went home, she sent him they had said, told her no. She thought about it. And this was not just a thank you email. This was following up after the turn down and basically saying, I really believe I have what it takes to do this job, not just the skills, but the concrete ideas um, to jump in and achieve the goals that you have. And she knew really clearly, what the goals were, what the problems were. She said, could I have 45 minutes of your time to come in and present my ideas and see what you think? So he said, okay, well, he admired this assertiveness and that she was being very respectful. She wasn't disagreeing with him. She just said, I think I could make a stronger case for you to show you how I can solve these problems. And he did give her the 45 minutes and she came in with, PowerPoints and charts and graphs and specific detailed plans of what she would do to deal with the problems and challenges that they were having. And she did get the job. So my point with that story is when you respond to concerns, you don't always get the next interview, you don't always get the offer, but sometimes you do. And sometimes you have that opportunity to have an additional discussion or to share information that can change the idea. It was worth a try when you have a real belief that I can solve their problem. Remember, because behind that job ad is organizational needs, organizational problems or concerns. The job ad is just this made up thing to try to get people in the door to solve the problem or do what they need done. So more about the thank you or follow up, usually email, but another quick thing about format is, if the real design or artistic flair, maybe you'll use that to create a, custom piece that you use US mail to send or that you use in a digital form. So I had one client once who um, the job wasn't necessarily a visual design job, but it did have some sort of presentation marketing elements. And she made a custom postcard and used that as her thank you follow up and wrote details on it. So you can customize it to your industry, your situation, your gifts and talents. But you do want to have a separate customized email or letter. As I said, usually this is going to be in an email format because of speed. You want it to get to them quickly. Also because, as I said, in some companies that US mail thank you letter may languish in some office manager's desk or administrator's desk if they don't even use mailboxes, or if they use them but nobody ever checks them because it's not part of how they communicate in their culture. Follow the tone and content of the interview, right? The content is that part about what's important to them, priority, where do they see as the top challenge for the first 3 months, that you'd be working on, what result or outcome are they looking for? And the tone part is, if you're talking to a peer whose main concern is they want a fun, competent, but fun coworker, you want to find a little bit different tone, a way to connect and communicate that to follow up on the interview, as opposed to the big boss, VP, where, their tone probably different. Knock out the competition. That is with that quality of your follow-up, right? When you're really thoughtfully asking thoughtful questions in the interview and then following up with thoughtful information about yourself or your ideas, that's above and beyond. There are some really interesting samples in a recent book by Wendy Enelo called Modernize Your Job Search Letters. Kate Wendelton's book is older, so, she's not talking about email, she's not talking about digital or, unusual formats, but what she's great at is using language and writing, listening, questioning and listening in the interview, and then language and writing. So she has some great examples in that book, which is older, but you can get used on Amazon or in libraries, where someone really did run into a barrier or an objection from the hiring manager and responded to it in the follow-up letter with really great, targeted language. So that's why I mentioned those. The other thing you can do to follow up is, let's see if I have it on, I have it listed here. It's what I call down at the bottom of this slide, the proposal pitch for the job. This is where after a final round interview or a second round interview, when you have enough information about their top challenges, how they view those top challenges, what they want to see as a result or outcome or great performance. When you have enough of that information, you send them above and beyond a standard um, follow-up letter. What could you send them that would show them what I call a future work sample? It's how you might approach that top challenge. Or a little piece of work on the top challenge, or an outline, or bulleted format. You don't want it to be very long. You don't want it to be a lot of text. Some people write about this, and if you Google, you can find examples of, the 30, 60, 90-day strategy for following up after an interview. Not so much for entry-level jobs or just after grad school, or mid-level or experienced or management jobs, thinking about what would you do in your first 30, 60, and 90 days on the job, knowing that it's a draft proposal, it's tentative, that of course you'd be learning more about there. What's great about this really differentiates you from the rest. Most people don't do this. People sometimes send past work samples, and those are helpful, but you're saying, I'm going to think about your problems and challenges from your point of view, and then send you something that can give you a sample of how I would approach that or what my ideas are. I will say, and after many years in this business, a lot of people that I work with do not do this. It is more work, but it definitely differentiates you. I will say everyone that I've worked with who has done this strategy has gotten some really interesting results. Sometimes job offers. In one case, she was kind of bummed because The person said, "Oh, well, we've pulled that rec, we're not going to hire anybody." And it's like, seriously? After I did all this work for uncompensated. But we talked about how, the work of doing that sort of sample of the marketing strategy that she would propose, it was for a marketing role, that would really help her do a future proposal like this more quickly, even in a different industry. She wouldn't be working from scratch. And she left behind, a very positive reputation and a positive opinion of her with these folks. Other people have gotten offers from doing this approach. Another sort of modified version was a young man who was a brand new grad interviewing. This is a true story from a Tufts grad. He was interviewing for one of those. We're a law firm and we want to hire a smart new grad and train them how to be a legal assistant or paralegal. So he knew that all the other people applying were going to be smart new grads. None of them necessarily had law firm experience or specific applicable experience. So we thought he used that question in the interview of, what was their top challenge? And they said they needed to this was some years back, they needed to redo their file and information access systems so that because they had some on paper and some online, and they needed to make sure everything was confidential, but that the right people could find the right information quickly. And he thought to himself, he went home and he thought, well, I don't know anything about information and files and law firms. And it would take me too long to go out there and like meet a bunch of people and research it. So he wrote one sentence and he added that sentence to the thank you email, right? So he didn't do a separate document. He didn't do a whole big plan or have big ideas because he was new and new to the industry. He didn't have big ideas yet or even small ideas. He said in his one sentence, "Understand that a top priority will be for this new legal assistant will be to work with the office manager on organizing the online and paper information files while ensuring confidentiality and proper access. I look forward to working with her on that and learning more about, perhaps by learning more about how other law firms are approaching this challenge." That's it. Just one sentence saying, "I heard what was important to you, and I'm looking forward to applying my organizational skills and contributing to the project." And they said that's why they picked him. Um, so that's just an example of how you can modify this. I like to always talk about the proposal pitch, kind of what if you were a consultant and you were kind of pitching for the job. Here's what I understand your challenge to be. Here's how I would approach it, as if with that mindset, and how you can apply that mindset at any level. Maybe it's just a sentence in the thank you letter. Maybe it's a separate document or separate set of ideas. So other types of correspondence here. We've got a networking request. We have samples of those on our website. One is that people find with using LinkedIn for reaching out to a Tufts alum. I'd love to speak with you to learn more, get your advice and feedback. Love to transition from my engineering role to the toy industry. You could be very helpful to speak briefly by phone to get your advice, perspective, insight. All of that good language is on our website, and you can find other resources online too. The challenge in LinkedIn is you don't have very many characters if it's in a request to connect. So sometimes, but LinkedIn is a great way to do it. If they're using LinkedIn, they click right on you and they can see a lot about you at a glance, which is nice. The other way to do it is, of course, email. And then in email, you can have a nice tailored subject line. I had one person recently who was very pleased and impressed with how quickly this alum got back to her. And the reason they connected so quickly was the person saw it and she mentioned right up front, I'm not sure if it was in this, I think it was in the subject line, that they were both from Torn Tickets. Or no, it wasn't Torn Tickets, it was the sketch comedy group, right, at Tufts. Totally different decades, but so if there's a connector that you have, whether it's a person's name who's introducing you that you both know, or the group you were both in at Tufts, put it right up front in the subject line, which is easier to do in the email format. Target mailing. I always like to spend a little bit of time on this because this is the type of search approach that most people don't think of because we sort of get conditioned to look for job ads and write a cover letter and resume, in response to a job ad. Target mailing is what you do when, gee, you'd really love to work for the Charles River watershed, and that's a bad let's pretend there aren't any Tufts grads working there when there actually are, either or formerly. But let's pretend it's, cool organization. You love their mission. You love the work that they're doing. You can't find a Tufts grad to network with into the organization. You can't find a second degree connection, where you know someone in common to introduce you to someone in the organization. They're not advertising for you. Maybe they're advertising for a scientist, and that's not you, or a marketing director, and that's not you. You write to the person that would be your boss for the job you wish they were advertising, right? And what you're saying is, for example, let's say it's the fundraising director and you'd like to work for him or her, helping with their fundraising. You talk in that first paragraph about how much aligned you are with their mission and you've done environmental volunteer or work before, and that then you say, perhaps, could you use a skilled communicator and event planner to help in your fundraising efforts, right? You focus on the skills you bring, what they may, if you have a reason why they might need help, that's awesome, right? That you've read that they are hoping to scale up from local rivers work to national, to being a national river water quality organization. For example, if you see something in the news or on their website or that you hear about, then you lead with that, as your congratulations on your efforts to scale up to a national river efforts. Could you use additional fundraising support in that? You imagine sort of what you know about what's happening and then what their needs might be. And then you pitch with, usually bullets are really helpful for a letter like this, and you attach a resume and you ask for a meeting. May I call you next week? How I could support and contribute to your fundraising efforts. Um, and always work? Of course not. They may be busy. They may have zero need for more fundraising help right now, but it does get noticed. And especially when you take the trouble to make that follow-up phone call, right? You leave a scripted voicemail, you write a little script for their voicemail, but you're ready to talk if they do pick up the phone. Um, and the idea is you're targeting places you would love to work. And, what's the harm, right? The upside is maybe you make a good new contact, someone that refers you to someone else, or is willing, talks to you, is willing to meet with you or talk to you and give you some advice or feedback about what you're offering. Or maybe you end up connecting and working with them later on down the line, right? And this is especially useful if you're in a niche field, write to the people doing the work in that niche. If you can't get a network or a networking or meet them at a conference or, other ways of connecting. And Liz Ryan is one approach, what she calls the pain letter, where you're not trying to tell them everything about everything you've done, but you're really hitting on might be bugging them, what they might need. You're not presuming you know all their story. So I have the link to her examples and how she shows what to do. You can use the pain letter approach for a traditional cover letter too. It's gutsy because it really focuses in on the main point, not everything they might say in the ad. So I tend to highlight it more for target marketing, but again, help you think about different ways to approach to have that personal voice where you're talking to another human being. Follow up after turn down. Okay. One example I gave you was the young woman who really, after she was turned down, she made a pitch and said, "Can I come in and talk to you? Because I think I really can." And be the one for the job. That's unusual. The more frequent follow-up after turn down is, dear Ms. Smith, I understand you've gone in a different direction for the business manager position. I wish you all the best success as you move forward with that. However, should your needs change, as I told you, as I mentioned in the process, your organization, your department is my first choice, or is my dream job, or something truthful about why you're following up, that you would love to work with this team working on those types of projects. Please keep me in mind if your needs change, and I hope we can stay in touch. Something like that. And Kate Wendelton, who wrote again these pre-digital job search books that are classics about writing and communicating, said there was someone who used that technique on her and it totally worked. A year later, she had really liked the person. They were a finalist, but she ended up choosing the other person. And a year and a half later, when she needed someone in a similar role again, she thought of this person, and reached out and did end up hiring him. So I'm not saying it always works, but the other thing that occasionally happens, and being in HR, I did see those occasions, sometimes someone doesn't show up for their first day of work. I know that sounds crazy, but it occasionally happens. What's great for the employer? They know who to call, right? You're the one that did the follow-up after turn down. Sometimes someone comes for the first day of work and they wish they hadn't. The company takes a little while, but moves them out of the job because it isn't, turns out not to be a fit. Um, so again, that's when they think about you. So a little bit about resources. I mentioned Modernize Your Job Search letters. Wendy Enelo has a lot of different resume and job searching books. Um, they're really helpful for talking about different situations, giving you interesting samples to look at. Shortcut Your Job Search. This is another Kate Wendelton classic that, again, is probably out of print, but is definitely out there. I checked. It's on Amazon and in some libraries. It's not actually a shortcut, because writing these sort of customized, thoughtful letters or emails to catch someone's attention and get a meeting, it takes work. It takes research. It's really, but she has some really inspiring and true examples, to help you see what's out there. And what I find when I look for target marketing examples on the web, it's sometimes I find good ones, but not always. So that's why I do go back to some classics, even as I say, it's sort of pre-digital age in some ways. Um, then this is the same cover letter article that I mentioned before, and the Muse has other articles too, both on cover letters and on other topics. And then this is the link to the Liz Ryan Writing the Pain letter, where you're hitting on their need, their pain, and potentially great for target marketing. So this is, like I said, you're in this modern job search age where you need some of the old tools and approaches, like a cover letter, addressing the needs of the job ad, but where we also encourage you to really think, creatively about how do you bring that personal voice in, or how do you reach out to and connect with the hiring manager in a direct way. Um, how do you perhaps, I mean, a great example again is a young man I was working with who didn't get a response to his cover letter and resume, but he saw that the hiring manager he wanted to meet was going to be speaking at the Cambridge Innovation Center. So he went and he was ready to stick his hand out, introduce himself, make a sort of mini intro of himself, not the full details of everything in a cover letter or an interview, but they had enough of a chat so that the manager said, okay, you're right, I would like to speak to you more. And they brought him in and he did go through the whole round of interviews, which would not have happened if he hadn't found a way to meet the managers. So that's just to let you know, you don't need to be locked into just traditional cover letter format, just following the instructions on the company website. You also want to think more broadly, how do I be visible? How do I build a relationship? How do I connect or be by this department, this manager? no other questions or comments coming in, then I wish you luck with your old school, good writing, personal voice to the people with needs, as well as with trying perhaps some new things or some different approaches. Good luck with those letters. Take care. Bye bye.